If none of us is prepared to die for freedom, then all of us will die under tyranny. That's lesson 20 of my book on tyranny, 20 lessons from the 20th century. What I'm doing now is I'm making a few remarks about where these lessons came from, and a few remarks about how I think they're still timely, or how I think they'll serve us moving into the future. So be as courageous as you can is number 20. If none of us is prepared to die for freedom, then all of us will die under tyranny. I wrote the book on the basis of courageous stands that other people have taken. The premise of On Tyranny was not that I was so wise. The premise of On Tyranny was that there are people who have endured more difficult challenges than many of us have, and that some of those people have left behind testimony from which we can learn. In American history, that testimony is often from African Americans. In the part of the world that I work on, Eastern Europe, that testimony comes from those who survived fascism or Nazism or Stalinism. Those were the examples that, as a historian, I tended in this book to draw from. But there's something about courage, which of course goes beyond national borders, or goes beyond even the border between history and the present. What history can do is that it can give us examples of people who, perhaps surprisingly to others or even to themselves, behaved in a way which was unpredictable and which set an example. Sometimes in our own media or in our films, we make courage impossible. We make courage an example, make courage something which is carried out by an individual who's extraordinary, who stands apart from everyone else. We make courage something which happens on the mountaintops. We make courage something that happens in some faraway country. But in my limited experience, at least, with people who I admire as courageous, in my experience as a historian, I think what we often see is that courage can take small forms. It can take everyday forms. It doesn't belittle the courage that people show in an uprising or in a protest or on a battlefield to say that it can be very hard to make eye contact. It can be very hard to say that word which contradicts what everyone else thinks. It can be very hard just to be that different personality who is not swayed by what everyone else is doing, as I talk about in lessons number 1 and in lessons number 9. Courage can take small forms. The important question is whether we choose to be as courageous as we can. Most Americans, most people in the United States can still take courageous gestures, can still carry out small acts of courage or larger ones, and reasonably believe that they will be free people afterwards. So what's our excuse? What's our excuse? People around the world are taking risks for freedom. If we look up from our own preoccupations and our own problems for a moment, we can see them and we can respect them. And people in the United States are doing the same thing. But more of us need to do this, whether it's in small ways or large. The point is to be as courageous as you can. This isn't just about, though, what we do and how we feel and how others think of us and how we will think about ourselves as we get older and look back on the choices that we made. It's also about the chances that tyrants have to rule us. Because if prospective tyrants, if the people who want to rule us, look out and see people who are willing to take small chances, willing to take risks, people who are being as courageous as you can, they're less likely to take risks. They're less likely to do the things that they need to do to seize power. So be as courageous as you can. It has to do with daily life, but like so many of these other lessons, it also has to do with the way things finally turn out. That was lesson 20. Be as courageous as you can. Thanks for being with me.
Grand entry and honoring nearly 50 years in the making for one man, Leonard Peltier, a well-known member of the American Indian Movement, or AIM.
something I didn't do.
Thousands of people from all over the U.S. and Canada came to the Skydancer Event Center on the Turtle Mountain Indian Reservation in North Dakota. Fabian Hurd traveled from Bemidji, Minnesota.
Well, my older sister, she was an activist. I mean, I never did understand what AIM was about until I grew older. So that's what brought me here today, welcoming Leonard home.
Even Terry Nelson from Rosal River in southern Manitoba, an AIM activist, made the trip.
Happy that he's going to end up at some point in a Sundance, which is going to, that's the spirituality of our people is still there.
For Jer Peltier, it was a chance to meet his great-uncle for the first time.
This is really important for the community, but on an international level, on an international indigenous political level, this is, a really big deal. This is, again, something that has been advocated for so long by so many people.
Peltier had hundreds of cameras on him all day long, from media to regular people and their cell phones to an entire documentary crew headed up by Jane Myers.
And I think as Native people, the way that we were 30 years ago, 40 years ago, even 25 years ago, we didn't have this A game. And we didn't have filmmakers that were making films and that were behind the helm to tell our stories from our point of view.
Myers' documentary called Free Leonard Peltier aired at the Sundance Film Festival. She plans to add his return home to the film. Myers says she's in talks with 4 major companies for distribution. Because of this, Peltier was not doing interviews with news networks. Peltier went to prison for killing 2 FBI agents in 1975 on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. He and many others in Indian country maintain he was locked up based on false evidence. While he didn't get a pardon, he got clemency last month by outgoing U.S. President Joe Biden, with poor health cited as reasoning for him to serve out the remainder of his sentence on house arrest. During the homecoming, organizers reminded spectators all day long to give Peltier space for his immune system. Turtle Mountain Tribal Chairman Jamie Azure was amongst Peltier's support letters for clemency. Azure wasn't born yet when Peltier was sentenced.
Leonard Peltier's name was almost a character in a book for most of my life until this leadership position. And now it's almost like bringing characters to life and really sitting down and saying it's a real person. And he really did go through these things.
A figure that many here, including 17-year-old Kurt Fleury, only learned about in school. He's come to show support and wants to talk with his fellow tribal member.
Ask him how it felt whenever he got sentenced and how those people made him feel.
There are some, including the FBI, who believe Peltier shouldn't have been granted clemency, as well as those who believe he was complicit in the circumstances surrounding fellow AIM member Annie Mae Pictou Aquash's murder, who say they can't support someone who condones violence on Indigenous women. But for those at his homecoming, they didn't let those concerns dampen their spirits. Pierre Wheatley, Quebecois National News, Winnipeg.
This could be the first generation of children in the United States that lives less than its parents.
I got 2 pills I take for my diabetes, then I got 1 for cholesterol, high blood pressure, and then I take Byetta, which is an injectable.
I'm getting really shaky and I'm sick and I'm fatigued, and that's when they diagnosed me with hypertension and diabetes.
Obesity, diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure cost this country more than $120 billion each year.
People are saying, you're crazy. You're a cancer patient. You should be resting. Doctors told me this.
When I had the second heart attack, the doctor said I should prepare for death.
Heart disease is an absolutely toothless paper tiger that need never, ever exist.
People who were raised in Japan, the Philippines, Korea, China, never had heart disease, prostate cancer, colon cancer, breast cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis.
This is the atlas of cancer mortality in China.
Virtually, the Western diet was non-existent. They had no animal products. They had no dairy, no meat.
We learned that we could turn on and turn off cancer growth just by adjusting the level of intake of that protein.
I knew at that point what caused most diseases.
Our national authorities are simply excluding this concept in order to protect the status quo.
With the Western diet, there are going to be 500,000 people in this country this year who will have to have the front half of their body divided, their heart exposed. Some people would call that extreme.
I know of nothing else in medicine that can come close to what a plant-based diet can do.
If you go through life thinking that what happens to you from a health perspective is based on your genes, you're a helpless victim.
I've reversed the diabetes. The diabetes is not coming back.
I just can't understand what it's done to change my life.
Diet is so much more important than anybody ever thought.
To me, the answer is so simple, it's criminal. And it's just people starting to take responsibility for their health and starting to eat more plant-based foods. It's that simple.
November 2013, Morogoro, Tanzania. Inside Sequoia University of Agriculture, a rat is born. He will be named Magawa, and unlike your average rodent, he's been bred to be a hero. Within the university is the operational headquarters of APOPO, a U.S. nonprofit focused on anti-personnel landmine detection using a very specific method, dubbed hero rats. The animals are trained to sniff out landmines. Over the years, the furry foot soldiers have been deployed to places like Mozambique, Angola, Zaire, and Cambodia. Landmine contamination remains a serious concern in many parts of the world. Luckily, southern giant pouched rats present a feasible yet unorthodox solution. These rats possess an extraordinary sense of smell, which enables them to detect the chemical compounds present in explosives. Enter Magawa. After enlistment, the rat undergoes a rigorous training process, learning to approach a potential minefield in a carefully calculated grid pattern, sniffing the ground intensely, and when a potential explosive is detected, to signal his human handler, who then marks the area for deactivation by professional deminers. The rat's light weight allows him to search the ground freely without risk of setting the explosives off, and he's also able to complete sweeps quicker than other methods. A hero rat can clear spaces inside 30 minutes that would take a human being 4 days. Plus, he's a rat, so the overhead is way cheaper. 3 years pass, and with his training complete, Magawa leaves his Tanzanian proving grounds and ships out to Cambodia. Cambodia is among the most heavily mine-contaminated countries in the world. It's estimated that millions of landmines and unexploded ordnances were laid in the country during its various conflicts, particularly along the border with Thailand and in rural areas. Over the years, tens of thousands of Cambodians have been killed or injured by landmines and UXOs, and since the 1990s, significant efforts have been made by numerous organizations to demine the area. Once being dropped into active service, Magawa got right to work, and after 5 years, managed to clear more than 56 acres of land, finding 71 landmines and 38 UXOs, becoming the most successful mine-sniffing rat in APOPO's history. By June 2021, Magawa reached 8 years of age, and having reached his species' life expectancy, began to slow down. Though his heart may have still been in it, standard APOPO operating procedure demanded his retirement. But before hanging up his helmet, the veteran spent several weeks training 20 new recruits to become the next generation of hero rats. With his work finished, Magawa returned home and retired to a life of snacking on bananas and peanuts. In early January 2022, Magawa died peacefully in his sleep. In his short life, he sniffed out danger and saved the lives of many Cambodian people, even helping to ensure that more will be saved in the future. APOPO still operates throughout the world to this day, detecting landmines and saving lives in the smallest of ways.
Police are only supposed to use tasers when they face an imminent threat from a suspect, according to many guidelines.
But our investigation here in Mississippi found law enforcement officers often use their tasers in dangerous ways, sometimes against people who didn't pose a threat to them.
Like Vivian Burks, a 65-year-old great-grandmother who was shocked by police in this very park.
We reviewed police incident reports, body camera footage, and taser logs that showed that Vivian Burks was shocked at least 4 times, even while she was lying on the ground.
Tasers work by delivering an excruciating shock that temporarily debilitates somebody. And every time the device is fired, it generates a log.
So we spent months gathering taser logs. We got logs from 36 agencies detailing more than 100,000 taser deployments.
15 seconds is the maximum that officers are supposed to tase someone. Otherwise, they could risk serious injury or death. That's why the Justice Department says that they should use extreme caution before doing so.
But the logs led us to multiple cases where officers triggered their tasers for far longer than that. Like the case of Skylar Pruitt, who was hallucinating after taking drugs and was fighting with 5 Pearl police officers. The taser log showed that 3 of those officers triggered their tasers 24 times, a total of 136 seconds of shock time, which is 9 times the acceptable limit. While some states have some sort of regulations or laws guiding how officers should use tasers, that's not the case in Mississippi.
This has left a patchwork of outdated and inconsistent taser policies in law enforcement agencies throughout the state.
At least 22 people have died after being shocked by law enforcement officers in Mississippi, which underlines why it's so important for police agencies to monitor their officers' taser use. When we sat down and shared our findings with several agencies, some said they would reconsider their policies. In McGee, the police department revamped their entire taser policy and started requiring regular audits of the officers' tasers.
But other departments didn't respond to our request for comment or explain why their officers used their tasers in the way they did. That includes the Carthage Police Department. Their officers were the ones who shocked Vivian Burks. Vivian Burks told us that even though she didn't have lasting serious injuries from the encounter, it's haunted her, and emotionally it's been extremely difficult for her to recover from.
President Trump's envoy to Ukraine, meantime, is in Kyiv this morning for talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky about the ongoing war with Russia. The meeting comes a day after the U.S. and Russia agreed to begin work on bringing the conflict to an end, following face-to-face talks here in Saudi Arabia, as you're seeing now. Missing from these talks, though, were any officials from Ukraine. Yesterday, Zelensky said he was surprised his country hadn't been invited to those talks and reiterated a decision about ending the war that cannot be made without Ukraine. President Trump said he was disappointed by Zelensky's reaction and appeared to blame Ukraine for the war, even though it was invaded by Russia.
But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
And just a few moments ago this morning, Zelensky is pushing back against President Trump, saying he, quote, lives in this disinformation space. James Waterhouse, with our partners at BBC News, is following developments from Kyiv.
I think Kyiv's worst case scenario couldn't even pictured the past week at the start of what is going to be a very difficult peace process for Ukraine. Not only has it not been involved in the first round of talks, which solely involved Russia and the US in Saudi Arabia, but we now have Donald Trump increasingly aligning himself with Moscow, where he suggested President Zelensky has an approval rating of just 4%. The latest figures suggest it's more like 52%. He's echoed that Moscow demand that there need to be elections in Ukraine, when here they have been legally postponed under martial law. And there are, of course, practical difficulties with hosting an election. How could you do it where there is fighting breaking out, artillery overhead, and occupied territory? They would neither be free, fair, or safe. And then, of course, you have the real stinger that we had from Mar-a-Lago, that Ukraine was to blame for the full-scale invasion that Russia started 3 years ago and continues to wage today. The American envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, has arrived by train where he will meet with President Zelensky. On arriving, he said, look, I understand the importance of security guarantees for Ukraine, that military presence to stop Russia from invading in the future after any ceasefire is signed. But I imagine President Zelensky is going to want to call him up on a couple of points his boss Donald Trump made last night as Ukraine tries to insert itself in any way into these peace negotiations. Washington says it will be involved, but Ukraine really is starting on the back foot, hardly from a position of strength, when it looks like Russia is having its demands, its goals increasingly met.
All right, James Waterhouse, thank you for that.
David Pogue, this Grammy Sunday is on the musical hunt for a brand new sound.
The last new instrument to join the standard orchestra configuration was probably the vibraphone in the 1920s. Before that, maybe the tuba in the 1830s. But that doesn't mean musicians haven't kept inventing.
Each year, we invite people from around the world to submit their latest, greatest, craziest, most innovative new musical instruments.
Jason Freeman is a professor of music at Georgia Tech, which hosts the annual Guthman Musical Instrument Competition, which celebrated its 15th birthday last year.
A lot of what's in the competition is really coming from a single artist, a single musician who's trying to make that new sound.
New sounds like these. And again, it's not electronic.
No.
These are latex and air. It's called the Babel Table. And according to inventor Jean-Francois Laporte, it's technically a wind instrument that uses compressed air.
One day I just put a balloon on a tube. It sounds great.
Cap Mustatea's team creates computer-generated singing with their dance movements. Here, it's the word alone.
I realized, you could put sensors on a dancer's body and that data could be anything, but could it be language?
I mean, imagine if this thing catches on and pretty soon you have combination aerobics choral practice. Anthony Dickens brought his circle guitar.
There's a motorized wheel that spins around and it strikes the strings. And so you can play with two hands. So you see how that's spinning.
Oh, man! Max Aday invented something called vocal cords.
There's 3 strings that are all conductive rubber cord stretch sensors. So as you pull on the strings, you can control how the voice is being processed.
That's cool. I wonder how much a Grammy weighs. Yeah. Do any of these things ever go on to a post-competition life?
Yes, they do.
For example, you may remember the tube-like contraption called a talk box, made famous by Peter Frampton in 1975. At the closing concert of each Guthman competition, each finalist performs a duet with a traditional instrument. And then it's time to announce the winners.
It really shows what's possible when art and design and engineering and music all come together.
In second place, the Babel Table. And first place...
And finally, the first place prize goes to vocal cords.
And congratulations! New music is born!
Thank you so much. Oh my God. Wow. Thank you.
This is how to get in shape fast.
If you want to drop this,
start eating more of these. You might think this would take years to learn, but I'm going to teach it to you in 60 seconds. Watch this.
Visceral fat can cause
We almost could not believe we were going back to our homes in Gaza and the northern part. The emotions were so high. We felt for the past 15 months we were in permanent displacement. And all what we were seeing, the destruction of all means of life, made us to lose hope until the return of displaced people home. And it was the first step forward to rebuild our shattered lives. We walked for a long distance, close to 4 to 5 kilometers, the width of the Netzarim corridor.
Happiness and excitement right here, half a mile away from Netzarim Junction. We see an ongoing flow.
This particular location holds many of the bad memories for Palestinians from the first Intifada, the second one, and the genocidal war. It was a location for illegal settlements. It turned into more of a death trap for many people who were crossing between north and southern part of the strip.
I cannot describe my feelings. It's mixed pain, grief mixed with joy. We are going back to our homes, even in ruins.
Walking alongside with people talking about their longing to see their homes, to see their neighborhoods. They came back and did not find any of this. We could hear people who were still in Gaza in the northern part, that there's nothing left for them at all. What happened to Gaza was nothing short of an annihilation of an entire population across the Gaza Strip. Many of my favorite spots in Gaza City and the roads do not exist anymore, and that just hit me so hard and made me get emotional most of the time just walking by areas. And I often point out to my colleagues and friends that here existed so-and-so building. But again, it's so unrecognizable because of the scale of destruction that not only changed the physical outlook of Gaza City or the Gaza Strip as a whole, but also it keeps erasing memories, beautiful memories for that matter. As we walked back and we toured part of Gaza, we heard a lot of people make a reference to 1948 Nakba. All the acts taken by the Israeli military fed into one conclusion, that Palestinians were on their way to a permanent displacement. But coming back represented not only the defiance, but also the resilience of the Palestinian people, that despite the devastation, the destruction, they made their way back and set up their tents and set up their lives from a starting point. The journey ahead of them is littered with many of the challenges. Shelters are not available for them, but also the inability of the ceasefire to hold and continue, because they don't want to go back to the same square where all what they could see was the mass bombardment of everything. For more than 100 days, the Israeli military trapped a whole population in the northern part of the Strip, deprived them from food, water, and other essentials, and they did not leave their home. That's a strong message for everyone who suggests that Palestinians need to be relocating somewhere else, as if the problem is the Palestinian people and their existence, not the genocidal acts that was carried out by the Israeli military, and not the occupation by itself. The issue should be addressed this way. There is an occupation that is making people's life so hard, and it needs to end, and people need to stay where they're at. I just hope and pray day and night that we're not going back to the living conditions of the past 15 months. And I hope we don't have to live this once again.
It's almost nightfall. Every evening, starving kids go out to get dinner. Climate change has devastated this place. Now there's only one food in sight: cactus. For the children, wild and prickly cactus fruit. Basically no nutrition. When there's no fruit, they turn to the raw cactus itself. And for the most desperate, chalky ash mixed with water. Here, where it hasn't rained properly in years, the ultimate culprit is climate change. And the West's myopia and passivity about climate are destroying lives across a belt of drought-afflicted southern Africa. A generation ago, this land was lush. Crops, flowers, forests. Now, due to a combination of El Nino and climate change, it's a desert wasteland. This drought in 7 countries hasn't received much attention. Comment ça va? But according to the UN, it's left 1.3 million children malnourished. Severely acutely malnourished. By a huge margin, severely acutely malnourished. Severe acute malnutrition. You see that his arms are like sticks. So what does climate change look like? Major rivers have vanished into puddles. The few wells have dirty water. And the cows, representing the wealth of villagers, their bank accounts for emergencies, are being sold off because they too are starving. For people like Hondrana, there's no debate. Do you believe the climate here is changing? Hondrana has 6 grandchildren. All of them are malnourished. None has ever had a bath. She's 76 and says this drought is unprecedented. Here's the paradox of climate change. It's mainly caused by affluent people, people like us. And those who suffer the most are the poor and vulnerable. Slowly, the social fabric is being pulled apart. There are millions of kids just like Vokandraza and Voriavi. Their trauma runs deep. It'll carry over and impede growth for generations to come. At most schools, kids are dropping out to scrounge for food. But before I left, I stumbled upon a bit of hope. This small school. Enrollment has soared by more than 50% in 1 year. But why are kids going to school? To eat. The World Food Program offers free meals. I've seen these school feeding programs all over the world. And at 25 cents per day per child, they fight starvation and keep kids in school.
Misy kantiny scolaire sakafany eo.
But it's a temporary fix. Real systemic change means investing in climate and putting a price on carbon. Let's not forget, these problems are caused by your car and mine. Donald Trump can pretend that climate change is still up for debate. But as long as we defer action, kids in places like this will continue to starve and die.
Firefighters are making progress on controlling the California wildfires, which have been burning for more than a week. The equestrian community continues to come together to help evacuate horses impacted in those areas. Founder of Compton Cowboys, Randy Savvy, joins us now with an update on their efforts. Randy, so good to have you with us today. Before we get an update on the fire situation, tell us a little bit about the mission of the Compton Cowboys.
Our Compton Cowboys mission really is to bring humans and horses together for the greater good. My family, being here in Compton, started our little family ranch in 1988 with the purposes of, bringing horses into this community to do community development with at-risk, underserved kids in a time that was really a crazy time with all the social issues that were going on here. So we've been doing that for over 35 years now, and we're still in it, still in the mix.
Let's move now to the wildfire situation and how that community has been impacted. Give us an update on the conditions there.
You know, I'm so proud of the equestrian community in Los Angeles. People don't realize that there are thousands of horses in the greater Los Angeles area, and the equestrian community is very prominent here. And it was so profound to see. But just like us in true form, when those horses are in need, our community steps up. So when the fire started in those first couple of days, the within that first 24 to 48 hours, maybe even pushing on to 36, but or 48 um, those horses that needed to get moved were pretty much moved. There were horses all up and through the canyons out in that area, all up in the valleys, and where a lot of those fires were taking place. Even out in Altadena, there's a big equestrian community there. But it was so amazing to watch how swiftly, once those horses were in need and needed to be evacuated from those fire zones, the equestrian community just rallied. And so many horse folks from all over the county, even from Orange County up to LA County through San Fernando Valley, were out there, trucks, trailers, getting those horses moved into. And right now, I haven't heard in the last few days any horses that perished, any horses that went through anything really bad. And that's a testament to the equestrian community and how much we really care and how active we get when it's time of need.
What's next for you, and what would be the biggest need moving forward for your group?
I would say for us, actually, here in Compton, we've been lucky and fortunate to be kind of insulated from all the fire issues. But so I would say anyone that wants to donate and put time and effort towards continuing to help in the efforts of relief for the horses, to definitely go to the main evacuation centers and zones where the horses were taken. So the LA Equestrian Center is one, Hanson Dam Horse Park is another, Industry Hills Expo Center is one, and then Pomona Fairplex. Those are the four main places where horses were taken, and that right now they're heavily populated with rescue horses. Our organization has been back to regularly scheduled programming with serving our youth here in our after school program with our kids, because they are also in heavy need always for us for just their extracurricular after school things of, these kids come from harsh backgrounds. They need activities to do and need places to go, and our ranch is their safe space. So we, even through all the mix of all the chaos of the fires, we still have wanted to make sure that we remain present for them. So that's what we've been doing. But I would say anybody that wants to help, go to those four, look up those four places and see how the best way you can go about helping and serving there.